For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jason Crean, and I'm on the board of directors for the AFA, so we really appreciate you being here at our convention and supporting us. I also want to welcome you to my region, the Mid-Eastern Regional. Woohoo! So thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pete Sakas. I've known Pete for longer than we both want to probably admit to. But he's at Niles Animal Hospital here in the Chicago area, practicing 35 years, lecturer, author, amazing personality, goes awesome places on vacation. Do you have any vacation slides to show us today? No, okay. Great pictures, okay. But he's just done so much for aviculture and keeping it alive. He's been so supportive of the Avicultural Society of Chicagoland here, as well as Greater Chicago and the other area clubs that have existed. So we're just thrilled that he's here, and he's talking about one of his favorite things today, poop. So welcome, Dr. Peter Sakas.
Yeah, I was at the task show a few weeks ago, and someone walked up to me. I was at the table saying, "Ask the vet," and they said, "Oh, you're the poop vet." So I'm known as the poop vet, but it's better than being known as a poopy vet, so to speak. Thanks for the intro. It's really great being here. I think the only person who's seen more bird poop than I have is Dr. McDonald over there. I think because he's a lot older than I am, because I'm. I found out he's just a little bit older than me, so that's okay. So anyway, I do a lot of interesting things, not quite as interesting as Dr. McDonald. Actually, I'm known as Dr. God of Rock. I do rock and roll reviews for an online rock magazine, so I've met a lot of rock stars, including Ozzy Osbourne, Pete Townsend, things like that. So I do have a different side, just like Dr. McDonald does. Okay, so what we're going to do, next slide. We're going to talk about the amazing cloaca. I know you guys take the cloaca for granted. You look at the droppings, but it's really an amazing structure, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, and then we're going to talk about, like I say, one of my favorite subjects, the dropping. Okay, next slide. The word cloaca comes from the Latin word meaning sewer and the Greek word meaning to cleanse. Okay, and it's a common chamber for both the digestive, urinary, and reproductive tracts. And it's unique to both birds and reptiles. So it's a pretty amazing structure when you think about it, because you see the vent, but it's not really an anus. The vent is an opening to that unique structure. Okay, next slide. There are three internal compartments to the cloaca. There is the caprotium, the most cranial part, which is the most front part here. It's hard for me to see right here. Okay, so the caprotium right there. I'm sorry, the caprotium is over there. The rhodium, which is urinary, and then the proctotium. So these are all separated by different folds. So basically you're having all these products come into this common chamber. So it is a pretty amazing structure when you really kind of stop to think about it, all these different things that are happening in that one little structure. Okay, next slide. Now, the colon comes, this is the reproductive tract. The cloaca is down here. Let me come over here. Here's our cloaca right here. Okay, the intestines feed right into there. Okay, and then we have the urinary tract feeds into there. In the female, we have the oviduct that feeds in over on the left side, just like Dr. McDonald was talking about before. In the male, we have the two testicles, and we have the vas deferens comes down in here. Okay, so all those things feed into the cloaca, and it's very important too when you're doing surgery on the birds, because you know where the intestine feeds in. The intestine feeds in over on the top a little bit. Okay, next slide. So here's a picture.
Oh, please, I don't get any sound if you don't speak.
Okay, I'm very demonstrative when I talk. I'll try not to gesture. Oh, okay. That's good. Okay, that's good. Okay. So anyway, here's our cloaca right here. And the cloaca is right here. The intestinal tract feeds in over on top, right in here. The oviduct comes down here and feeds in over on the left side, and the ureters come in here. So everything feeds into the common chamber right in here. And it's very, very important when you're doing surgery, as Dr. McDonald well knows. When you're making an incision into the abdomen, you got to be careful, because if you go too aggressively, you could hit the cloaca, you could hit the intestines, what have you. Okay? Okay, next slide. So, simply speaking, when a bird has a dropping, it's defecating and urinating at the same time, because there's a mixture of the urine and the feces together in the cloaca. then the bird, like I said, does not possess an anus. It has an opening called the vent. Okay, so it's a pretty unique little structure. Okay, next slide. Now, birds mate through the cloacal kiss. I know I didn't want to talk about the birds and the bees, so to speak, but we're going to talk about the birds just for a second. But they do what's called a cloacal kiss, where they line up the vents, and then the male injects the sperm into the female. The sperm then works its way up into the oviduct, and the fertilizations occur way up in the top there. So it's actually called, like I said, the cloacal kiss. And then the egg does come out of the cloaca as well. It comes through the opening of the oviduct into the cloaca, and then on out through the vent. Okay, next slide. Okay, now, birds that are very hormonal, and it's a big problem that we deal with in avian medicine, as Dr. McDonald also well know. We see a lot of birds that have hormonal issues. So a bird does not have to have fertilization occur to lay eggs. And I've seen cockatiels have laid over 100-some eggs at a time, throughout the period of time. So when a bird becomes hormonal, they get stimulated, they can start laying the eggs. The problem are you have complications, because there's complications with egg binding, and there's also complications with cloacal prolapse and even prolapse of the oviduct. So, egg laying can be quite a problem. Okay, next slide. Now, the cloaca itself is, the unique structure, but it doesn't take very long for material to pass through the digestive tract. It only takes about 3 hours for food to move through a parrot from the mouth to out to the cloaca. And the time is longer due to problems such as disease, increased by disease, and sometimes decreased if they're drinking a lot of water. So the bird's dehydrated. If the bird's sick, the passage of fecal matter will be longer, and it'll be decreased if they're taking a lot of liquid in their system. And the droppings vary in appearance depending on what the birds were eating. Okay, next slide. So I know this is a story of life, really. All right, next slide. So one of the most important factors that to consider with birds is the dropping, okay? You may not know what's going on with your bird, but you know something is different, okay? You may not know that he's got a certain disease condition, but something's different. The bird's acting different. The droppings are acting different. So one thing I emphasize with our clients is me, a real big maniac about watching those droppings. So basically what you do is changes in the droppings should prompt you to look for something going on and seeking veterinary care, okay? Now, you don't need to know the diagnosis, but you know something is wrong. Okay, next slide. Now, droppings, like I said, are an excellent indicator of the bird's health, and the changes in the droppings, in their appearance and their number are excellent indicators, okay? So you get a feel for what's normal with your pet, okay? That's the key. You know the normal number of droppings, you know the normal appearance of the droppings, and then something's different. There's fewer droppings, there's larger droppings, there's watery droppings. That should alert you. Okay, next slide. Now, we like people to change the cage papers daily. It's tough for a lot of breeders as well, because you want to be able to check the dropping every day, because the sooner you catch the problem, the better off you're going to be. Now, the number of droppings should be fairly consistent. If you're seeing less droppings than normal, then something's going on. Okay, next slide. Now, a reduction in the number of droppings could indicate that there's a problem with the bird not eating as well, so they're not producing as much fecal matter, or there's a reduction in the passage of the fecal matter through the digestive tract. Oh, you're quick on the trigger. That was good, though. I'm sorry. So over here, you can see these droppings, and you can see scant fecal matter. Okay? What's happening is you're still going to see, even the birds not eating, they're going to pass urine. So if you're seeing drops that are mainly urine, like a little bit of urine, which are urates, or the white part, to a little bit of urine and a little bit of green bile, okay, that's showing that nothing much is going through. That could be due to a problem with the bird vomiting. In other words, the bird's eating, it's not passing through, so the bird's vomiting, so that's why you're getting scant fecal matter in there. Or it could be that the bird is not eating well. Okay, so that's always very important to evaluate. Okay, next slide. Now, we recommend lining the bottom of the cage with paper, okay? Now, in the breeding situation, it's very difficult. People use the corn cob, they use the wood shavings, whatever. The problem that a lot of breeders run into is when they use that type of material, they can't see the droppings. And so they don't know that maybe the droppings have really changed in the bird. So if you have an environment where you have to have the wood shavings or the corn cob, what have you, then there should be some way that you should be able to check the droppings every day, okay? Because that's where you're going to be more successful, because so often breeders find a bird that's dead or dying, and because they just they feed them and they don't pay them a whole lot of attention to them. And if you don't check those droppings, disease conditions are going to sneak up on you. So what we recommend doing is taking, for the pet birds especially, take multiple sheets of paper on top, and then take the top sheet off every day and get in the habit of checking the dropping every day. Check the dropping number, check the dropping appearance, because the sooner you catch it, the better off you're going to be. Okay, next slide. Now, the normal dropping is made up of 3 parts, basically. There is the fecal portion. The reason it's green in seed-eating birds is because what you're seeing is you're seeing what's called biliverdin. Okay, that's the bile pigment. Like, for example, when people have liver disease, there's a change in what's called the bilirubin, because the primary bile pigment in people is bilirubin. In birds, it's biliverdin. Okay, and verd refers to green. That's why the bile pigment is greenish. Okay, so a bird that just eats seed imparts no color to the droppings, and that's why the droppings look green like that. The other part you see are the urates. Okay, urates are urine crystals. Okay, so birds actually do not produce urea like people do, or dogs and cats. Urea is a water-soluble waste product from the urinary tract. Birds secrete uric acid through the urinary tract. The problem with that is when a bird has a problem with the kidney and they start having kidney issues, the uric acid levels build up in the bloodstream, and it's a crystal, and it precipitates out on joint surfaces. So when we see birds that have kidney disease, we will see birds that have gout, articular gout. In people, it's due to dietary type of things, and birds, it's due to kidney disease. Okay? So you see the green fecal portion, the white urate crystal portion, and then you see a little liquid urine. Now, if the bird has a diet that is very high in fluids, like fruits and veggies, the droppings will be very watery, and they're going to have a lot of urine in their droppings. But typically, the bird droppings should be very compact and dry. Okay? Next slide. Now, like I said, we already talked about this. So the color of the dropping changes depending on what the birds eat. Okay? Next slide. Okay, so the fecal portion will change color. And I have found in my experience that birds seem to like the red pellets and the orange pellets seem to be the most favorite colors, okay? And quite often we have people come in and they say, geez, my bird's droppings look terrible. They're bloody, they're red, or they're orange. And it's because what they eat. I found the color that birds like the least, I don't know if you guys have found this, are the purple ones. Have you noticed that? I went to Northwestern, and it kind of breaks my heart, because that's my alma mater, but they don't like the purple dropping. They don't like the purple seed. But red or orange are really popular. And you can see in the dropping here the coloration, and sometimes it even comes out in the urine a little bit. So when you see droppings that look unusual like that, the first thing you think about, what have I done different? What's the bird eating different? So when there's a change in the dropping color, you've got to say, okay, what has the bird been eating? That's the first thing you should think about. And quite often, like I say, people come in because they say, gee, something's going on with my bird, when actually it's a change in the diet. Okay, next slide. You see this one? This bird loved the red pellets, and he also ate a lot of fruits and veggies. So that's why his droppings look like that. But they thought their bird was bleeding to death. But you can see that the urates are white and everything like this, but the bird was eating the red pellets, and then he was also eating a lot of fruits and veggies. Okay, next slide. And look at this one, a nice technicolor dropping here. He liked the orange pellets. He even had some green, eating some seeds. So basically, when I'm looking, and a big part of what I do is I'm looking at the droppings. In fact, before I even look at a bird, I look at him in the cage, him or her in the cage, and I look how the bird's acting, how the bird's breathing, how the bird's reacting, and then I take a good look at the droppings. And I look for the changes like this, and I see something like this, say, what does your bird eat? Or I see in the bowl what the bird's eating. But that always gives a tip off. But this bird was normal. Okay, next slide. Now, look at that one. What happened to that bird? Pomegranates. Okay? So they thought their bird was dying. They came in and said, oh, my bird's dying. He's passing these horrible bloody droppings. He's going to die. And I said, what's he been eating? I gave him some pomegranates, and there you go. Okay? But there you see the reddish color, and you also see the excessive urine from eating the fruits. Okay, next slide. All right, now, the consistency of the dropping will change depending on what they eat. A bird that eats a lot of fruit and vegetables, they're going to have more watery type of droppings. Another thing we'll see with birds that eat pellets is the droppings will be brown, and I have noticed through the years that some birds that eat pellets drink more watery, so the droppings are a little more watery. So a little more watery dropping, a little brownish color. But once again, know what your bird's eating and kind of watch what's eating, and then pay attention to the droppings. Okay, next slide. Now, when we see droppings like this, that's an issue, okay? Birds will urinate every once in a while, okay? We'll see birds that pass just urine, but it should not predominate. So when I see droppings like this, which are all urates, two things are happening. Either number one, the bird's not eating, or number two, the bird's vomiting, okay? Or, there's interference with the passage of food material through them, okay? So that's why it's so important. And no, that was okay. You did okay. We had a psychic connection there, buddy. We're doing all right. I'll send you the brain waves there. Okay. All right. So anyway, and you see this dropping here, and it's all urates, a little bit of biopigment. And when you see that, you've got to address that quickly because the bird can deteriorate pretty quickly because this bird is either not eating or this bird is vomiting. Okay. And actually, I should tell you about vomiting and regurgitation. Birds will regurgitate normally. Okay, when they're in their hormonal phase, their breeding phase, what they will do is they regurgitate, and they will have food in their crop, and they will bob their head and bring the food material up. And it's not sticky clusters; you just bring it right up. And I'm sure all of you that have birds, and all your birds love you, they regurgitate to you. Now, when the bird is vomiting, what they do is they'll bob their head up and down, and they'll take the material and fling it from side to side. So when I see a bird that's been vomiting, I will see sticky clusters on the head, mucus on the head, mucus on top of their head, and that's a bird that's been vomiting. But a bird that does regurgitation is not going to have that stuff stuck on its head, and that's all very important, okay? All right, now, the droppings, it's normal, like I said, for the bird to urinate every once in a while, but it should not predominate, and we talked about that. So next slide. Once again, next slide. Okay. Now, watery droppings should be evaluated because there are a lot of different things that can cause watery droppings. Number one, obviously, if the bird is eating a lot of fruits and veggies, they're going to have watery droppings. But sometimes it can be a gastrointestinal condition or something such as a metabolic disease, okay, such as diabetes or kidney disease. Okay, next slide. So this dropping here, this is a watery dropping here. The fecal is kind of semi-formed here, and there's a lot of urine in here. This bird was eating a lot of fruits and veggies, okay? And you see the droppings here, okay? So basically the bird had been eating kind of basic seed mix, but he did like fruits, and so they noticed that the droppings were changing after, and then we talked, and it turned out he was eating a lot of fruits and veggies. Okay, next slide. Now this bird here, don't mind that line there, I don't know why it's there, but you see, this is not diarrhea, okay? People say my bird has diarrhea. This is not diarrhea, this is polyuria. Okay, polyuria is very different than diarrhea. Okay, because the fecal portion is formed. Okay, you see how nice and formed that is? And then all the excessive urine, that's polyuria. Poly means many, and uria refers to urine. And this bird has a tremendous amount of urate crystals and a lot of urine in there. This bird had kidney disease, okay? So that's polyuria due to kidney disease. The way you diagnose kidney disease in birds is you do a blood test called a uric acid test, okay? You don't do a BUN or creatinine like you would in a dog or a cat. You would do the uric acid test, and it would measure this level, and then they would give you your answer. Okay, next slide. This bird here, once again, this is not diarrhea. The fecal portion is formed, excessive urine in here. This bird was diabetic. Okay, and bird blood sugar levels are very high. 2 to 500 is kind of the normal range. When I see a true diabetic bird, those values are up in the thousands. Okay, next slide. Okay, now when there's a more liquidy consistency to the dropping, it's indication of intestinal tract infection. So you see this dropping here, and it's all just loose and disgusting looking. Okay, that is true diarrhea, and that is some type of gastrointestinal disturbance. A lot of things can cause it. They can have cancer, they can have a bacterial infection, they can have a fungal infection, they can have all kinds of things that can cause the droppings to look like that. Another thing that I see is I'll see a bird come in and they have droppings that have kind of a grayish coating on it. That's mucus. So when I see a bird that has droppings that look kind of have a grayish coating, that's mucus that indicates some type of gastrointestinal upset or disturbance in the GI tract. So semi-formed, fecal matter, diarrhea, and so many different things can cause it. Yes?
Will all the stools that bird then has have that change to it? Or will they have that happen like their big first movement in the morning could be one that would be the telltale sign for the viewing, and then later ones in the day would not show that type of issue, and they still have a disease process brewing?
That's a very good question because bird... Sure. She's wondering if they have really loose droppings, if they have, a couple loose droppings, they had a problem compared to having loose droppings all the time. And if they have a gastrointestinal disturbance, they're going to have loose droppings throughout. What my macaw did is in the morning I would come down and she'd hear me walking down the stairs, and all of a sudden I'd hear a big splat all over the place because they hold their droppings overnight. Exactly right. And so if your bird first dropping is big and loose in the morning like that, it's because they're holding their droppings overnight. And then as they go through more through the day, they get better. Sure, that can definitely cause that. I will tell you, the African gray we got that's 39 years old, we got the bird when it was 29 from a family. The lady was a breeder, and her son was very violent. He was a jerk, actually, and she was terminally ill, and said, if anything happens to me, I want you to take my bird. So one day her son showed up with the bird, so my mom passed away, and she wanted me to give her the bird. So I take the bird home, set up in the corner, and I say, how you doing there, bird? And the bird goes, get out of here. And I go, whoa, you don't even know me. He says, get out of here. And then my wife walks up, and the bird goes, woohoo, hi, baby. And to this day, we've had that bird 10 years, and the bird hates me. The bird does the old African gray trick where they walk up to you, put their head down, so you want to pet the head and do that. Birds love drama, and the bird calls me Karen. My wife's name is Karen, so I call Karen. And so in the morning, I come downstairs, the bird sees me and goes, Karen, Karen. And I said, don't mock me, bird. But that's what the bird does. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is diarrhea. This is poorly formed fecal matter. Okay, next slide. Now, this here is a dropping that has very poorly formed fecal matter here. So the bird is not absorbing properly. A lot of different things can cause it. Fungal infection can cause it. This bird had megabacteriosis, okay, which obviously I don't know many of you had that, which is a real nightmare. Okay, next slide. And what happens with this disease is also called avian gastric yeast. I don't have a whole lot of time to talk about it. It causes dilation of the proventriculus. Basically, it grows in the intestine, in the proventriculus. It thickens the wall. They don't digest their food properly, so they pass through the food undigested like that, and they lose weight and they waste away. Okay, next slide. All right. Now, another thing that we see, and I can diagnose this one instantly just by looking at the bottom of the cage, is what's called pancreatic insufficiency, exocrine pancreatic insufficiency. And they get these popcorn type of droppings. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. But what happens is their pancreas isn't functioning properly, and so they don't digest their food. And so the food just goes through, big bulky droppings like that. Next slide. They call them popcorn droppings. The way you take care of that is you put on pancreatic enzyme, it goes away. So if ever you see big bulky droppings, they look real pale like that, this is one thing you should think about. Okay, next slide. All right. Now, undigested seed or grit in the droppings is abnormal and can indicate a problem. So it indicates a gizzard malfunction because I don't know if you know how the bird digests their food, but food goes down to the proventriculus where acid is added, starts the digestive process, then goes down to the gizzard where it gets all ground up and moves back and forth until it's liquefied enough to pass through the pyloric fold down the intestinal tract. So when the gizzard is not working properly, they're not grinding their food up, and so the food goes through undigested. And this bird here has undigested food in the dropping. Okay, next slide. This bird here has also undigested food in the dropping as well. Okay, so something's gone with the gizzard. Yo. Uh-huh.
Gizzard malfunction the only thing that could lead to undigested matter in the fecal matter?
No, it could be like things are moving through the digestive tract too fast as well. So it's always not strictly a gizzard malfunction, but that's a big reason. Okay, so this bird's an interesting case. This bird here is an African gray. They brought it in because the bird was eating like crazy and the bird died, and they want to know why. So you can see the crop is dilated here. Okay, next slide. And the gizzard, the crop is loaded with seeds. Comes down here, the proventriculus is right here, and the gizzard's right here. Next slide. Open up, and it's full of seed. And the proventriculus and the gizzard. What do you think the bird had? PDD, exactly right. Okay, this was in the old days, so we really didn't know much what was going on. They used to call it macaw wasting, and just like Scott talked about with the cockatoo and the beacon feather, when I was working with Dr. Fee, we thought it was folliculitis, we thought it was endocrine deficiency, and so this is another thing that's still in vogue. I still don't know if they really know for sure what caused it. A lot of people are talking about it being bornovirus causing it, but I talked to Dr. Ritchie, and he said a lot of the cases of PDD don't have bornovirus, some do, so it's still in a lot of vogue. I wrote an article about it last year, and if you go to our website, there's all kinds of avian articles I put up there, and you can definitely find it there. So feel free to download any articles. You can use them for your bird clubs. There's only a nominal fee of $1,000 per article. No, I'm kidding. It's free. Yes.
That bird seed?
Yeah. Is it the microphone? Can you hear it better? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm usually all over the place. So like chaining me to this is very difficult. Yes.
Going back to the gout and the kidney disease, you said it was excessive water in the stool and that feeding, all that kind of connected. If it doesn't turn to protein, where does it
Okay, the problem with gout, there's two forms of gout. I don't want to go too many tangents, but I'll go off on tangents. What happens with gout, there's two forms. There's what's called visceral gout and there's articular gout. Okay, visceral gout is when it gets really dehydrated and the uric acid just precipitates out over the body. It deposits all over the heart and the bird dies. We usually diagnose it on postmortem. There's nothing you can do with that. Articular gout is more the typical type of thing we do. And what happens is the kidneys are not functioning properly, the uric acid builds up, and they cause increased water consumption, increased urination, but it also causes stiffness in the feet. When the uric acid starts depositing in the feet, they get swellings on their feet. They're called tophi, and their feet get really stiff. So sometimes someone will bring a bird in, and they're having trouble perching, their feet are stiff, and that's sometimes one of the things that we'll see. So that's articular gout. That's what we fortunately more commonly see than the visceral gout, but the visceral gout is bad. But if you start seeing the bird drinking a lot of water, urinating a lot, then get your veterinarian and they could do a test, check for the uric acid levels. Okay, next slide. Oh, so this is a radiograph. This is a macaw, and you can see how gigantic the proventriculus is. But a problem that people were running into is they would see a baby bird, that had a great big proventriculus, and they'd see the bird has PDD. And as Dr. McDonald well knows, the baby bird sometimes they'll normally have a big proventriculus because they had fed. So just because the bird has an enlarged proventriculus, don't instantly think it's got PDD. There's different type of diagnostic tests we can do to nail that. Okay, next slide. Okay, now blood in the fecal portion of droppings is usually due to bleeding from the cloaca or the oviduct. Okay, that's fresh red blood. So just like in dogs and cats, when you see fresh red blood in their poop, it's coming from the colon, the terminal part. If there's bleeding further up in the intestinal tract, it's going to be black. It's going to be partially digested. So when you see fresh red blood coming out like that, there's either some type of growth in the cloaca, difficulty passing the egg. So it's in the terminal end of the system you're seeing the fresh blood. Okay? So we see ulcerations, tumors, all kinds of things. Next slide. Now, one thing we'll see quite often, unfortunately, and that's a typical bird, we'll see it with their cockatiels. We'll see cloacal prolapse, we'll see oviductal prolapse, just from chronic egg laying, okay? And that's a real nightmare, and that's a whole other lecture. But that sometimes we'll see them having difficulty passing eggs, and we'll see spots of blood coming out. Okay, next slide. All right, and that's just a picture. Actually, interesting. There's 3 eggs in here. And when a bird is laying eggs, and what really helps me a lot when I'm doing a radiograph on a bird that I think has a reproductive problem, one thing I look for is what is called hyperostosis or endosteal bone formation. And a bird that's laying eggs will store calcium in their long bones. And so it almost looks like a kid's skeleton costume from Halloween. The bones are absolutely solid white. And then this bird here, you'd think it would have that happening, but because it's got calcium deficient, it drew all that calcium out, and that's why it looks like that. Okay, so that's always a big tip for me. I mean, there's different guidelines I use. So if I see a bird that looks like this, that has a hyperostosis, I say reproductive. And I will see that also in male birds too. Male birds who have testicular cancer, they actually go through feminizing syndrome. So I see a male bird that suddenly is having hyperostosis, then you're thinking there's some type of problem with the testicle. Okay, next slide. All right, this bird here is actually passing blood. The fecal portion is dark, and there's also blood coming out in the urine. Okay, next slide. Now, one thing that we fortunately don't see much anymore, and I'm sure, Scott, you don't see it much anymore, the cloacal papillomas, but, he talked about pox, and boy, my heart warmed, thinking of all the years ago, all the pox, the wet pox and the dry pox we'd see in these birds. But cloacal papillomas were a real problem years ago. It's caused by a virus. It was in the New World birds, the macaws, and the Amazons. And what would happen is people would have them, the way you get rid of them is you surgically take them out, but they had a nasty tendency to come back. And a big part of my exam years ago was taking a Q-tip into the cloaca, into the vent, and prolapsing to see if a surgery had been done, because what people would do is they'd have a bird that had this problem, they'd have it surgery taken care of, and they'd sell it at a reduced rate to someone, and then you see the bird had surgery to repair that. But fortunately, we don't see it like we used to anymore. It was a real problem. The bird would strain, and how many of you guys are familiar with cloacal papillomas? Okay, yeah, a lot of the old timers, yeah. And I'm not being insulting, but anyway, the birds would strain. It would look like a great big raspberry or strawberry coming out. And my macaw actually died from that. That's how I got her in the first place. And she ended up dying. It just spread all over. So it was really bad. Okay, next slide. Now, the urate portion is something very important for you to look at. And this is something I don't want you guys to forget. I want to emblazon this in your head. The urate portion should be white to off-white. When it changes colors, it can give you some idea of what could be going on. And when it turns green, like this, that is called biliverdinuria. Okay, so the biliverdin, which is the labile pigment, is coming out into the urinary tract, and that's because the bird has hepatitis. Okay, now people say this is chartreuse. I say it's neon green. But if ever you see a bird that has this type of urate in their dropping, be very scared, because that's pretty diagnostic for psittacosis. It's definitely hepatitis, but it can also be psittacosis, and I assume psittacosis until I learn otherwise. We do diagnostic tests to find out. Okay, next slide. This bird here has dark green urates. What's wrong with this bird here is this bird was in liver failure. This is about a 40-something-year-old bird whose liver was toast. The bird came in dying, and he ended up dying, and his liver was toast. But his urates were this dark green color like this. Okay? So always watch your urates. Next slide. Now, this bird here, well, we're going to skip that. I'll go to another one in a second. Go ahead, skip it. All right, I just want you to remember that. This bird came in, this bird had the neon green droppings, the bird was losing weight, had a super high white blood cell count, psittacosis, okay, and it still exists. Next slide. Now, we're talking about the urates right now in the urine. When you see red in the urates, in the urine, this is called hemoglobinuria. What happens in hemoglobinuria is the red blood cells are rupturing in the system and they're passing out in the urine. If ever you see this, this is diagnostic for lead poisoning, okay? And I assume lead poisoning until I can prove otherwise. And I start them on calcium EDTA right away when I see this, okay? A lot of times what will happen is you'll see a bird that has droppings like this, and you do an x-ray to look for the lead, and the lead's not there. I still treat them until I prove otherwise, okay? But we see so many birds get into stuff that have lead. They live in older houses. If lead was not available in paint till after 1975, but we've had birds that live in older houses and they chew through the superficial safe paint, get down to the old paint underneath. So I have a whole thing about household hazards. I can't go into that, but just remember, if you see a bird that is dropping like that, you think of lead poisoning, heavy metal. Yes?
You're saying that it's not like possibly a kidney disturbance?
It could be kidney disturbance as well, yeah. Just an infection of sorts, yeah, systemic disease, you know, causing rupture of the red blood cells. Okay, next slide. So just another one, they had lead poisoning, same type of thing. Okay, just be well aware of that. All right, and then you also see blood in the urine. Okay, this bird here had a tumor. Okay, had a tumor in the kidney, and it was passing blood in the urine. So you do pass blood in the urine as well. Next slide. And this bird here had also a kidney damage, and so he's actually urinating blood. Okay, next slide. All right. A fortuitous photo. All right. Sony, next slide. So basically what this talk is about is, I'm sorry. I was going to start there to do my preaching, you know, everyone say amen. Okay, let me stay in here. All right. So basically, I want you guys to get in the habit of checking your bird's droppings every day, okay? Look for changes in the droppings. Granted, there's going to be little changes here and there through the day, you know, but you look for the consistent change, like the big bomb dropping in the morning. Okay, that clears up to normal droppings throughout the day. That's great. But if those normal bomb droppings are happening all the way long, it's a problem. Changes in the color, you know, you may not know what's going on with your bird, but you know something is different. And when you know something's different, the radar should be up, and then you should seek veterinary care if needed. Because you catch this early, and then you're going to be much better off. So that's my preach for the day. Okay, thanks. All right. Yes. Yep. See, I have great slides. I could have put a picture of me and Ozzy Osbourne up there, but I decided to use that one. Okay.
Do you recommend any probiotics for birds?
Oh, yes. I use aviculture. Aviculture I like a lot. I know Don Perez who developed it. But avian probiotics are great because they do have probiotics that are specific for birds now. Yes, definitely probiotics are great. Avian, yeah. Yeah, the other stuff is like dog, you know, like probiotics and things like that, but aviculture is specific for birds. Okay.